Welcome to Storytime, etc. We try to post scary stories every day, so please subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified.
Story 1. True, monster, or imagination. My name is Brandon and I live in Alabama. I'm about 14 and this story takes place in the year 2008 or 2009, not really sure, I was young. So at the time I lived with my grandma and grandpa, which I'm not going to say why. So we were not beginning to move in, we were doing things around the yard, putting grass around the house. We had a few people helping my grandpa and grandma while me and my brother played around in the street and around the house. It was not a very big house but big enough for us, and it had a deck on the back of it and there is a small patch of woods behind it. So while me and my brother were playing, I just felt something off about the woods, like something was in there watching, and I would hear sounds of leaves and branches moving. Maybe it was the wind or not. Maybe 40 or 50 minutes later we were hungry and thirsty, so we ate and later went back to play. So when we got back we went to play. About 10 minutes passed and I forgot about the woods and the sounds I heard. I stopped and just looked to see if I see something, and I walked over, not really close but close enough, and still nothing. It's like what was ever in there just stopped, so I didn't want to think about even more because I get paranoid easily, and left and didn't go back over behind the house. The next day there was only a little grass left to cover the house and the sun was setting, and I didn't remember to avoid the back of the house unless necessary. I was playing and walked behind and had a feeling in that something else was here. I turned to my right and saw this big animal or something like a werewolf with yellow eyes looking, laying on the ground. I stood there seconds, then ran to the front of the house telling my grandpa. Well, he didn't believe me and told me to keep playing, so for the rest of the time I just sat at the front of the house thinking what that was. I still don't know what it was or if it was there at all, and before I moved from there I swear I hear things outside in the woods and sometimes see things. I hope this story gets on the channel.
Story 2. True, I lived in a haunted house for over a decade. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into the house I grew up in. It wasn't an old house, and no one had died in it, and it didn't even feel creepy. Just an average suburban house in your average southern suburbs. The way the house was set up, when you came in the front door, there was a hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom to the right, the large living room in front of you with a half wall separating it from the dining room to the left, and the kitchen on the other side of the dining room. Where the kitchen and the living room met, there was another small hallway, and the master bedroom, a bedroom that was used as an office, and a bathroom, and then breakfast nook leading to a laundry and utility area at the end of the kitchen. My room was to the right of the front door and down the hallway past the bathroom, with the other bedroom on this hallway used for storage, mostly as I was my mother's only child, and my half-brother and sister didn't live with us and rarely came to visit. The first time anything really happened in the house, I was about 9, and had lost my last tooth. Still being a kid, of course the tooth fairy was expected, so when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing in the middle of my room, I assumed it was the tooth fairy. It was bald, and only about 3 or 4 feet tall, about the size of an average child, standing completely still in the middle of my room. I remember my parents telling me that if I was awake, the tooth fairy wouldn't leave me any money, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I got up the next morning, I excitedly told my parents that I'd seen the tooth fairy the night before. I described what I'd seen, but they told me it was just a dream. For the next several years after that I continued seeing and hearing minor things in the house. When I was home alone, cabinet doors would open and close, I'd hear dishes being moved around in the kitchen, or catch movement out of the corner of my eye. The most common was often at night I'd wake up to see a young woman hovering over my bed. She was dressed like the Rosie the Riveter character from the old posters from the 1940s, with the red and white bandana around her hair and a denim shirt. When I would see her, she'd stare at me for a few minutes and then slowly float over my body and out through the wall behind me. I was never afraid of her though. When I was about 12, my parents divorced and it was just me and my mother living in the house. By the time I was in my late teens, my mother was rarely home, and my house became the hangout for me and my friends, most nights everyone gathering together to play Dungeons and Dragons or something similar after work. One night we were hanging out, but didn't want to play, so I pulled out a Ouija board I'd picked up at the local toy store a few weeks before, wanting to try it out. We sat in my room to play with the lights out and the door closed, and it went pretty normally, nothing crazy happening for the most part. The only strange thing that happened was at one point we asked something like "show yourself," and at that point we heard the front door open and close, and heavy footsteps come down the hall towards my room. The handle of my door started to turn, and one of the guys jumped up and locked the door before it could open. We didn't hear anything else, no footsteps moving away from the door or anything, and after a little while we turned on the light and opened the door to see if my mother had come home unexpectedly. The house was empty and the front door locked. We decided we'd had enough of the game at that point, put it up and everyone went home. A few weeks later, we were hanging out at my house again, this time playing Dungeons and Dragons, though one of the girls that usually came had to work late and had classes in the morning, so she'd said she wouldn't be coming. While we were sitting in the living room to play, at around 2 in the morning, suddenly we heard footsteps run across my wooden front porch. It sounded like someone very short or a small child running quickly. Everyone in the room heard it, and we had a conversation as to if our friend had changed her mind and had just arrived as she was very short, and it made more sense than a child running through the neighborhood at that time of night. When she never came into the house, we all got up to look and there was no one outside and her car wasn't in the yard. Her boyfriend, who was with us, gave her a call, and verified that it wasn't her as she just arrived home on the other side of town and was headed to bed. Around this time, the activity in the house picked up. I saw shadow figures with red eyes often in the living and dining room of the house, footsteps and other noises at all hours of the day or night. I started waking up in my room to see hooded figures standing near my window and door. It was around this time my half-brother, who I was close to, passed away. It was sudden, and I hadn't seen him in years as he'd gotten into drugs, and my mother had decided to keep me away from him because she didn't want him to be a bad influence on me. After that, I'd wake up hearing his voice saying my name in the middle of the night often. On a whim one night, I sat down and typed out a letter to him on my computer that was in my bedroom since I was home alone that night and was bored. Now this computer was hooked up to an old dot matrix printer, one of the really loud kind that makes all kinds of racket when it's running. After I wrote the letter, I felt silly for it, and deleted it without saving or printing it and shut down the computer before I went to bed. Around 3 in the morning I woke up and my bed was soaking wet. At first I thought my puppy had peed on the bed because he was too small to get down, even though he was housebroken and I'd taken him out just before bed. I got up to let him outside and change my bedsheets when I realized the wet was just water and it was more than a tiny puppy could have made. It was sudden, and I hadn't seen him in years as he'd gotten into drugs, and my mother had decided to keep me away from him because she didn't want him to be a bad influence on me. After that, I'd wake up hearing his voice saying my name in the middle of the night often. On a whim one night, I sat down and typed out a letter to him on my computer that was in my bedroom since I was home alone that night and was bored. Now this computer was hooked up to an old dot matrix printer, one of the really loud kind that makes all kinds of racket when it's running. After I wrote the letter, I felt silly for it, and deleted it without saving or printing it and shut down the computer before I went to bed. Around 3 in the morning I woke up and my bed was soaking wet. At first I thought my puppy had peed on the bed because he was too small to get down, even though he was housebroken and I'd taken him out just before bed. I got up to let him outside and change my bedsheets when I realized the wet was just water and it was more than a tiny puppy could have made. The hooded figures appeared more often. I woke up one night with the feeling that I was being stared at, only to roll over and see what looked like a rotting corpse a few inches from my face, and one night woke up to a hooded man standing at the foot of my bed with my bedroom door open when it had been closed before. He held up his hand and a ball of blue light appeared in his palm, which he threw at my face. He and the ball disappeared just before it hit me, but the room was so cold that I could see my breath on a normally hot southern summer night. When I was in my early 20s, after I moved out for good, I had one last experience in the house. My mother hadn't been to the house in months and was preparing to sell it. I'd told one of my cousins about the things that had happened there through the years, and he decided that one night out of boredom, he and a friend of his would pick me up to go ghost hunting in the house while it was empty. We each had a camera, and he had a voice recorder that we brought. We set the recorder in my old bedroom, and spent an hour or two wandering around the house taking pictures. When we got done, we came back to my room and sat to listen to the recording and discuss all of the nothing that we'd found. On the recording we could hear our voices moving from room to room and talking about how my cousin's friend's camera had a sexy shutter sound, and the fact that my camera stopped working almost as soon as we walked in the door. About 20 minutes into the recording, when we could hear all three of our voices echoing from the other side of the house, a deep voice that sounded like it was right up against the microphone on the recording spoke, "Get the fuck out." We immediately obliged. I found out a few years later that my mom actually had several experiences in that house with waking up to find an older man in his 50s or 60s looking through her closet, or seeing him just wandering around the house. When she'd say anything or get his attention, he'd turn around and look at her, and then vanish. She always thought she was just dreaming or something, but with everything I saw over the years at that house, I can't help but think it was something else.
Story 3. True, was he holding a knife? This story took place my sophomore year of high school. I was 15 girl, young for my grade. It was a Wednesday in the winter. I joined the honor society at my school. Besides meeting and talking about how to help my community, we also had to meet at 7:20 a.m., which was 25 minutes before school. Since I wasn't a morning person, missing more time to sleep was always frustrating. That's why I was always late, which on this day I was running late. Being 15, I couldn't drive myself to school, so I had to have my grandma, who lives with my mother and I, take me to school, since at this time my mother would be in the bathroom, putting on makeup before work. My grandma opened the garage with a button on the garage wall. Both my grandma and I got into her car, which was parked in the garage, of course. Once closing the door, she would pull out into the driveway. Now, she looked back towards the front windshield to pull out to the right towards the street to our cul-de-sac. And I screamed to stop, and she quickly slammed on the brakes. There was a man, tall about 6 feet. Dirty blonde-looking hair, wearing all black. He was only illuminated by the headlights, since on winter mornings it was pitch dark and today it was raining. I noticed something in his hand. Being the observant person I was, I thought I saw a black handle. The man didn't look at us, explain himself, or wave a hand to say sorry. He just stopped in front of the lights for about 3 seconds before continuing to walk through our yard towards our neighbor's house. We watched him disappear in the dark. I live in a neighborhood where we all know each other and watch out for each other. We all own about 1 acre of yard. Recently, my neighbors have been having work done around their houses with taking down some trees and fixing up their house. So my grandma, with her heart of gold, continued driving as we discussed what just happened. She assumed that he was just a worker. I knew he wasn't. I told her I thought he had a knife, and she brushed it off, saying, maybe it was a worker holding dustpan or a shovel. He could have just been using out yard as a shortcut. But no, something told me I had to warn my mother. So I began trying to text my mother, but no texts were sending, nothing was going through. I texted, lock the door. But when it went through, she didn't understand. She questioned me, saying, why? At his point I called her, quickly explaining the situation and yelling at her to bolt lock the door. She did. And not a second later he opened out screen door and tried to open our door's handle. When it didn't work, he tried to kick the door down. My mother then called the police. I don't know how quickly the police arrived. But we live in a small town, so I assume the response time was fast. When the police arrived, she told them what happened and they write up a report. Later that morning, the man was found a couple roads down. He tried to get into some other houses too, when he ended up getting into a house and a man had chased him out with a shotgun. He was caught and arrested, found with a large butcher knife. Although this isn't an extreme story, it always holds a lot of what ifs. What if I hadn't been late? What if I hadn't gotten a hold of my mom? And the biggest one of all, what if I wasn't late and my grandma would have asked him if he needed help? I'm now a junior in high school and it's been about a year, but the effects of this encounter still haunting me. I'm afraid to be alone. I will double check or even triple check locks, and listen intently to the sounds of my house when trying to go to sleep. If I hear something, I'll try to go check it out. He's made me paranoid, but I guess my fears are rational. Who expects their own home to be the site of a creep encounter?
Thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And please like and subscribe to help support the channel.